Welcome to the Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator roadmap session. Today I'll take you through the 2020 highlights as well as what's planned for the future releases of the Testing Accelerator. My name is Anthony Shorten and I'm one of the product managers responsible for the Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator. For people not familiar with the product, the Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator is the testing solution for Oracle Utilities application framework-based products in the Oracle Utilities portfolio. The solution is available for both on-premise and cloud customers, and in fact is included in the SaaS cloud services. Before we get into the roadmap, let's recap what the product is all about. Testing is about verifying business processes that help ensure the product implements the way you operate your business. Business processes are a sequence of instructions, typically representing individual functions of the product in a sequence you want to use them to implement your business process. The final part of the puzzle is the test data that needs to represent your unique data. From a UTA point of view, these assets are represented by flows, components, and test data sets, respectively, with test datasets being available at both the component and flow levels. Once these assets are ready, they are sent to the execution engine to run the tests. The engine sends the test to the testing API, which is installed on the target environment. The Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator supports a range of Oracle Utilities products in the portfolio, including cloud services and on-premise versions. These are all supported via content packs, which include the testing API and assets within Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator itself. The execution engine then generates test results, which includes all the payloads as well as the metrics and performance information related. So let's talk about use cases and how people use the product. Everyone's familiar with what's called traditional automation. So it's functional testing, regression testing, and sanity testing, which is basically a form of regression testing where you test the environment is ready for testing. So which can happen in cloud when you set up your initial environments. It's to initiate them. Additionally, people use the tool to do what's called risk assessment. This is a very common use case where you have gone live, or you're about to go live, or you're in the process of going live, and you've got a number of changes that come in from either Oracle or your partner, and you want to assess those against your business processes. And UTA can be used to check that the business processes, what the effect of any change is, whether it's positive or negative, and make that assessment. The other thing is people do is they use the tool to take on new capabilities inside the products. As new versions pop in, they can experiment with those new capabilities and see whether the business process would benefit from taking advantage of new capabilities by comparing before and after results of tests. Blue-green testing is a common technique you see with cloud customers, but certainly our on-premise partners and customers are using blue-green testing. It's where you will test two versions of a product simultaneously. And this is very common when you upgrade. So for example, you've got the old version and the new version. You still need to test the old version as well as the new version. So you'll do what's called very similar to what blue-green testing is done. Test both simultaneously and then go live with the upgraded version. Customers obviously can have more than one Oracle Utilities product or service. And so the Oracle Utilities Testing Accelerator has been architected to support tests across products and across cloud and non-cloud. And we have a new hybrid capability, which I'll talk a little bit later, which is unique to the cloud. One other area customers are using it for is obviously they've modeled their business process with their extensions. They want to look at removing that extension to reduce their costs. And so they can assess the removal of that extension and moving to the base functionality using the Testing Accelerator as a way of doing that. Obviously, if you're moving to the cloud, customers are using it as part of their migration. And we have a license for that capability. where basically you can test before as part of your migration into the cloud and test after the cloud to see whether your business process has been retained across that move. And lastly, customers are using it to optimize their business process. Because they model the business process, they can see the timings between each component or each part of the process and then alter it and see whether they can improve that process over time. So these are use cases that customers have used the product, not necessarily things that we've built into the product initially, but these are things that you should take into account when we're looking at the roadmap, because we are building capabilities to make these use cases even more easier to do. So let's talk about the goals. Now, the way we're going to go through the goals, the reason I'm going through the goals at the moment is talk to you about what the product goals are in terms of what we provide versus what we are providing in the future. Now, the ultimate goal for the product is to reduce testing costs and risks associated with automation. So look at the first one is that it's unique in that the solution is not just a testing tool. It's a testing tool with content. So providing more content to the customer means less work the customer has to do and less rework the customer has to do. So we are looking at enriching that content to provide more value to the customers. The second is most testing tools in the market tend to focus on technology. They tend to be very scripted oriented, or they're very oriented around screens. We want to shift that focus away from more diverse testing and also provide a testing tool which can be used by not only technical people, but the business people as well. Because the more business people that test, the more likely that verification is easier done and more enriching. We saw from those original use cases that we really want to just not limit the product just to functional testing. So one of the goals of the product is to go beyond functional testing and provide a more end-to-end, more complete solution for customers. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the roadmap. And one of the areas that we really want to concentrate on, and one of the goals, is provide an end-to-end capability so customers can not only test the product, but everything around that product in terms of data coming in, data out, as plus providing a full lifetime experience, life cycle experience. So before we get into the roadmap, let's talk about 2020. While 2020 was tumultuous for everybody, we did a lot of work in 2020. In fact, we have a new release coming out, which by the time you listen to this recording or this session, that release will be out for on-premise as well as cloud customers. So the first thing we introduced was a thing called a conversational data entry, which is something that allows a tester to quickly prototype data very early in the life cycle. So in the past, people had to wait for data to arrive at certain points in the life cycle. You can now test earlier by prototyping the data. And this tool allows you to interact with the system in a conversational mode, hence the name, and allow you to quickly prototype data and then save that data as a test data set so that you can start testing very early. As part of our move to be more business-like, we tried to simplify things. So one of the things that we simplified was data import from an environment. So now it's not necessarily technical focused. You can now generically say what you want, and it will go get the data from that environment for you and load it up. We are starting to experiment with including test data sets as part of our packs now. And one of the things that we recognize very early on is if we provide you data, you may need to realign that data to your specific areas or specific data that you have on premise or on the cloud. So we have now a bulk data replacement capability, which allows you to take our test data sets, do bulk changes and replaces so you can reuse them in your tests. One of the areas that we did work on very heavily was a extension of the cloud license and some capabilities around that. So now cloud customers, uniquely to cloud customers, can use their UTA license and the users of those UTA licenses, as included in your service, against a non-cloud instance. So you can have it as part of a migration, or if you're a customer who has more than one Oracle Utilities product, you can use the cloud version of UTA against that product. You will still be responsible for the connectivity between the cloud and your premise or your other cloud instance, or on PaaS. But once that connection is provided, we have a The license now lets you do that. We've implemented what's called fine-grain execution control. So during an execution, you can see it live. You can stop the execution at any point in time, examine what's happening, and then start the execution from that point onwards. So there's more control on that side. Also, we changed the engine behavior. We also changed the execution engine to take on a set of settings to allow you to globally influence the engine's behavior. For example, by default, the engine will continue the process, a flow, even if the components fail. And the idea with that is if you want to test different conditions, you could do that. You could now tell the engine to stop at certain points or stop globally, and you can have that. You have finer control in terms of the execution now. The other also important is that we autonomously upgrade customers as part of the tool. So your content will autonomously be upgraded to a later version if you adopt a later version of the tool itself, as well as a version of the Oracle Utilities product that you're upgrading. So there's no touch upgrades for you. As part of that change, though, we want to highlight one of the things that feedback from our customers is we wanted to highlight what we changed. So we actually now have a visual indicator on your assets to tell you we have changed it for you so you can see the impact of an upgrade. One thing we also do is try to reduce the costs of our costs as well as your costs in terms of using the tool. And we're trying to consolidate the assets that we have provided out of the box. And that's including consolidated libraries and a consolidated API set. And we've just started that process. So again, you won't necessarily have to do anything. These libraries will be automatically included as part of your upgrades and automatically used as part of the content that we provide to you. Okay, so let's talk about the long-term strategy. And this long-term strategy is we call a North Star plan. Now, the North Star plan is basically where we want to see the product in terms of componentry, the way it's architected, and the way we want to see the functionality. We've had a long-term plan, and I will not necessarily go into the detail of the long-term plan, but I will cover what we're planning the next year in terms of the setups. Now, our long-term plan has an architecture which looks something like this. The red bits are the new things that we're looking at, and you'll see some interesting things there, and I'll talk about some of those as we go through. Okay, so let's go back to those goals that I talked about, and I want to frame the roadmap and using these 4 goals so you understand. Okay, so in providing more content, we want to improve the ORM content that we provide. If you don't know, there's a thing called the Utilities Reference Model, and we provide a pack which includes all those reference model processes, pre-built processes, which are common practices across all our products in UTA already. We've been working heavily with the ORM team to improve that content and provide more value for those. So you'll see constant changes to that, as well as additional changes inside UTA to provide that information. We want to reduce our footprint, as I mentioned before, and we give you more increased coverage, and we've got some functionality around that. We also want to build up some new capabilities to generate data on the fly. So providing you more capabilities to allow you to quickly get data into the tool, because we think in the future that will be the one area that a lot of people will end up working. The other thing is around content, we want to introduce what's called smart components, which actually are a bit more, at the moment our components are fairly simple. We want to make them a bit more complex so that we can give you more value. And we also want to allow customers to extend that, including having their own content as well as a content marketplace so you can share content across customers, across partners and so forth. So you can go to a library and get information if you want to, or content from other sources if necessary. Now, we also want to work on the technical focus. We're talking about user experience, and I'm going to talk about that today, including a business view. One of the major things that we're going to introduce is what's called a test planning toolkit, which allows you to end-to-end plan a project and implement that project in UTA. I'll talk about that in another time, but I'll talk a little bit about that idea. We're going to introduce test data managers. The idea is test data sets at the moment are incorporated into the flow and the component parts of the tool. We think that they're so important that we need our own management capability for those test data sets. And that goes along getting more test data generated and so forth. Again, emphasizing test data is going to be a very important part of the product. Now, we also want to move away from lists of sequences. We want to move to BPM, and I'll talk a little bit about BPM in some of the new generation experience that we've got. We're going to introduce what are called flow generators, which allow you to quickly generate flows and from various sources, and also refine our test data libraries so that we can provide you a more meaningful experience when we deliver test data to you. So we'll talk about some of those when I talk about some of the user experience. Now, going beyond testing, we're going to introduce some generic functionality to allow you to compare across tests. We're going to link to the migration assistant. And the migration assistant is a tool that we implemented on the cloud, which allows you to migrate your data, not only your configuration, but your transaction and master data. And so at the moment, you can initiate that from your cloud instance. You'll be able to also do that from UTA. So we'll provide an interface to allow you to, when you're in a test, you don't have to jump to another system to go move your data. You can come into UTA and say, okay, I want to run that extract and monitor it from UTA. We also want to improve the autonomous upgrade. We think there's some more areas that we can tweak it to make it even more meaningful. We improve the results interface, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the last thing we want to introduce is a thing called upgrade assessments, which allows you to do a post-review of your tests to make sure, is there anything you can do better next time? So we're providing some tooling to do that. On the end-to-end, we want to provide a more general experience. And so what we're doing there is introducing test scheduling, implementing test reporting, some analytics, which are unique to the cloud, and then some adapters and team-based tools, as well as a UTA API, which allows you to call our tool from other tools. Now, the test reporting and analytics, just because they're our cloud exclusive, they will be available to on-premise customers, but in a documentation form, so you can recreate any of our reports or any of our analytics and in your favorite tools, including Excel, if you wish. Now, let's get to something exciting, which is about the user experience. So I'm going to take you through a planned user experience. Now, these are mock-ups, so they're just PowerPoint mock-ups to say what roughly it's going to look like. They still have to go through a member review, so they may change. So just point out, this is what we think at the present time we would like the user interface to look like. So I want to point out a few things. First of all, it's Redwood-based, and if you're familiar with Redwood, that's the direction Oracle's taking all its products, including the framework products, are going to Redwood, which is a user experience, not just a skin. It's a user experience. We're going to support this technical and business view, and you'll see that. I'll point that out in some of the screens. We're going to be accessible multilingual. We still have that commitment, and we are accessible multilingual today. We're going to emphasize on getting more done with less effort and being more simple. And we also recognize that you want to personalize the whole experience. So we're going to personalize the setup. So let's talk about this example of the main page. I'm going to point out a few things. So it's using the Redwood styling, it's the Redwood colors and Redwood palette. So you'll see at the top, you're going to have a hide menu. Your menu is going to be hidden. You can have domain support, and you'll see that also in the framework, where you can actually say, this is my development copy of UTA. You can see that you can configure the zones. They'll be dynamic. You can move them around. You can set up your own personalization. You can bookmark support, and there's avatar support as well, and a zone library that will supply to you. So it's important that these kind of features allow you to personalize the system and also get information out of the system. And for example, this is what we think. What we see the most important thing is having an alternative way of expressing your flows. And the idea is using BPM, business process management style, which is a flow chart. So you'll be able to drag and drop information in here, BPM style. There's going to have sections, so you can actually break a very large test into smaller tests, or a very large flow into sections. And you can turn off and on sections, so you can report on sections. So, for example, you may have a data setup section at the start of your tests, which set up all your data. but you may necessarily want to report that when you're reporting the test. But a manager might say, how much time are we spending on data setup in our tests, for example? Now, you can see up here, we've got a view toggle. So this is a business view. So you can see there's text and everything. A technical view would be more technical, and I can see that. They get the same user experience, but the different layers of information will be exposed to both the technical person as a business person. The menus now will be on the side because we have a lot more of them. You can personalize these as well. The menus will be hidden depending on your role, and it gives you more flexibility in setup. Now, the menus will be sorted not in alphabetical, but in what we think the way people use it. And lastly, this is an example of a results screen. As you can see, it's got more information, including simplified messages, the performance impact of things. There's color-coded states so you can see things. It gives you an overall summary. You can go see the results in detail by clicking in and seeing things. So it's a bit more user-friendly interface. You can kind of see the flow of a test very simply, including color coding. Now, the last thing I want to cover before I finish is that we're trying to set up a user group. So we decided we'll start the process over and start the user group started, and then as the time goes along, the user group will revert back to the users themselves. But if you're interested in coming to the user group or being part of the user group, contact myself or Shashank with the emails you see on the screen here. Initially, because of COVID and other restrictions, it will be a Zoom call, but long term, we would like to include it as part of the Edge conference or the Customer Connect conference. So it's an area to share information and also share ideas. Thank you very much.